Welcome to Altea Talks, the brand new podcast series being brought to you by Altea, the unique provider of combined insurance and risk management solutions designed exclusively for the medical, allied health and care sectors. I'm going to be your host, Will Marshall, and I'll be joined in this series by some of the leading movers and shakers from across the sectors. My guests are going to include practitioners and professionals, regulators, clinical risk and governance specialists, and an array of legal experts who are going to help us get to the heart of the hottest topics affecting the UK's health and social care sectors today. So, if you're looking for frontline knowledge and expertise, if you want valued insights into these most dynamic, challenging and rewarding of sectors, then look no further because you're in the right place. Welcome again to Altea Talks. Hello and welcome to this latest episode of Altea Talks. The health and care sectors in the UK never seem to stand still. Every day we see new service lines, new treatments, new products, new entrants to the market. It's a fast-moving, dynamic and ever-evolving picture. Today we're going to talk about a subject that's very close to our hearts. We're going to discuss how the medical indemnity insurance world is changing and needs to change to keep pace with and to service the needs of its clientele. I'm very pleased to be joined today in this discussion by Vickie Rhodes. I should say at this juncture, in the light of full disclosure, that Vickie is a colleague of mine working at Altea. Vickie is a very seasoned insurance professional. She has more than 2 decades of experience in insurance underwriting and predominantly broking. The last 15 years of this have been spent specialising in professional and especially clinical negligence. This experience gives Vickie a unique understanding of the UK health and care indemnity insurance market. Vickie's insurance career started when she was underwriting in professional indemnity at QBE. She then moved to the MPS to work in its insurance subsidiary, MPS Risk Solutions, where she arranged corporate insurance for the entities and administered schemes for the individual clinicians. From there, Vickie moved to McParland Finn, a PI specialist broker with an S&T division, to set up a med-mal department, placing business both on the open market and via delegated authority schemes. Vickie then moved to AJG, where she joined their UK regional healthcare team and looked after a wide range of healthcare businesses, spanning from NHS primary care providers to private hospitals to individual healthcare professionals. After that, and after a stint at Marsh, Vickie joined Altea last autumn in the role as Business Development Officer, where she's able to grow broker relationships for Altea across the north of the UK. And Vickie has greatly enhanced Altea's broker engagement capabilities. Vickie, a very warm welcome to Altea Talks.
Thank you.
So today we're going to be talking about all aspects of medical indemnity insurance cover. And I think probably a good starting point for that topic, and I appreciate it's a very large topic, is to have a look at the 2 main types of private indemnity coverage for healthcare professionals in the UK. There's been an awful lot of debate, discussion, consultation, controversy about these 2 competing types of coverage. And I'm talking about the discretionary indemnity model that we see through the medical defence organisations such as the MDU, the MPS, MTDUS, against the regulated insurance model that is being provided by the commercial insurance sector. So, Vickie, if I could start by asking, what in your experience are the principal differences between these 2 main types of indemnity coverage?
Coverage would be one of the main differences. So your indemnity insurance is typically going to be on a discretionary basis, may not necessarily have any limits to that cover. However, it is at the discretion usually of a board or of a panel. So if a doctor maybe doesn't comply with the organisation that's arranged the discretionary cover, then cover can be withdrawn. There's no contractual basis. It is, however, generally on an occurrence basis. So in the event of claims notifications, etc., in the long term, that can be more advantageous for doctors, knowing that as long as their indemnity was in place at the time that an incident occurred, that coverage would be there in the future. Whereas regulated insurance is generally going to be on a claims-made basis. However, it is a contractual insurance policy. So the terms will be agreed upon in advance. They are set out in writing. And the only reason the claim would generally be declined is if it falls outside of the contract insurance.
So there's a greater degree of certainty about the availability of that cover provided.
Absolutely. It's a regulated policy. It's a regulated wording by the FCA. So there is an agreement in place in terms of the wording and the parameters of the cover.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly in my experience in working as a solicitor in private practice, we did come across a number of occasions where an individual surgeon, usually a surgeon, had not had the discretion exercised in their favour and cover was not available for a particular claim or a series of claims. And it certainly resulted in a great deal of financial hardship for the surgeon or for the healthcare professional and his or her family. But also, it's not fair for the patient, because it seems quite extraordinary, really, in the 21st century that we have a system where a patient may not have recourse to compensation because of the type of cover that the doctor is holding, and quite lawfully holding, and is entitled to hold.
Absolutely. But similarly, the organisation that the doctor works for, I've seen a case whereby the indemnifiers have decided not to proceed with the claim due to discrepancies with the doctor's attitude, which seems, generally working with contractual insurance, there's absolutely no way you would be able to withhold cover on that basis. So then the patient's left without recourse and then had to go down the route of trying to make a claim from the employer or the corporate that actually contracted with that doctor because they had some contractual insurance in place.
You mentioned earlier the difference between occurrence-based and claims-made indemnity. How does that difference impact the accountability and financial security of policyholders in the event of a malpractice claim?
So in terms of occurrence-based cover, that would generally work in a doctor or a healthcare professional's favour, because as long as they're working and they maintain their cover, any claim that's that may perhaps come in 5 years, 10 years down the line, as long as the incident occurred at the time that they were working and had insurance or indemnity in place, the claimant would be indemnified. Claims-made insurance is slightly different, and the insurance needs to be enforced at the time a claimant goes to make a claim. So should a HCP be working for, say, 30 years, buys their insurance on a claims-made basis and retires in, say, 2010, 3 years later, ex-patient of theirs discovers that something's been missed and they go to make a claim against that doctor or clinician. Had that clinician not continued to take out run-off cover and ended their insurance at the time that they ended work, there wouldn't be an insurance policy in force at the time the claim was made. And again, the patient would be left unindemnified, which is why we would go down the route of procuring run-off cover. So once a HCP comes to the end of their term, decides to retire, they've been working for X amount of years, for the next 6, because the patient's got 3 years from a date of discovery to be able to make a claim, to continue to buy some cover, not to provide cover for any ongoing work, but just for any incidents that may have occurred while they were still in that role.
Yes, of course. And as you say, that is a feature really of medical malpractice claims, is that they can have quite a long tail. It can be a significant period of time until someone becomes aware of, let's say, a misdiagnosis or a misreported scan or whatever it is, and the consequences of that taking time, which can then lead to a claim being delayed and being made some years after the event, albeit subject to the limitation period that you've mentioned.
Although obviously with children, or if somebody is mentally incapacitated, then there is no limit on...
Yes, yeah, that is the case. So medical indemnity insurance can be quite complex, as we've just seen with a couple of examples that we've discussed. In your experience, how well understood are these nuances, these differences between the types of cover, the types of indemnity?
I think quite often they're not understood until somebody tends to fall foul. So either a claim potentially falls outside the scope of what cover they have or thought they had, timeframes because they were under some sort of misunderstanding about the type of cover that they had in place. Or similarly, somebody goes to sign a contract and all of a sudden it becomes apparent that maybe the cover that they thought they had isn't actually providing them the cover that they required. Or similarly, the contract requires one thing, they're doing something else, and there's some cross wires between what they think they need and what they actually need.
And it's part of the broker's role, isn't it, to help policyholders to navigate those sorts of complexities and to make sure that the cover that they hold is appropriate to meet their particular needs and circumstances.
Absolutely. As a broker, it's really important that we understand the differences between different policy wordings, different requirements, because quite often our clients don't.
Yes, I mean, one of the things certainly that we find at Altea is that there is a great deal of interest from our insureds in having some sort of assistance in explaining the terms of the policy and providing clarity about that. So whilst I understand that it is a part of the broker's role, I also think that insurers have a role to play in making sure that the terms, conditions and limits of the cover that they're providing are fully understood.
Yeah, absolutely. And to work with clients, because it's not always a one size fits all. And sometimes they just do need a little bit of assistance, maybe being able to make some slight amendments, changes to wordings to be able to ensure that either they can comply with contractual requirements or just give them the cover that they need to have in place to be able to do their jobs.
Yeah, of course. So given that we are seeing a lot of new entrants into the health and care sector market, we're seeing a lot of new treatments and a lot of change. What are the main reasons that you see or you saw when you were working as a broker for clients looking to review or maybe even select their insurance provider for the first time or switch cover?
Levels of cover and the availability of the cover that they require at that time is obviously really important. The price, unfortunately, is always going to be a driving factor,
isn't it?
Yeah, as a broker, we would often say that that's not always the most important. And we do see that clients will place a lot of value in other things, but price is fundamentally always going to be there. In terms of underwriting flexibility, I think is really important, not just in terms of, well, like you say, new treatments, being able to have somebody that's got an understanding of how they work, risks, and being able to cover them quite often at short notice, because somebody might just decide to do something and it takes a while for it to get to the right person to sort out the insurance for it. Policy limitations, and like I say, what cover's available, but also what wordings are available, because sometimes a head of cover might be covered, but taken out then by way of exclusions, endorsements, etc., doesn't always work, particularly if somebody's got some quite stringent contractual requirements.
How important is it, in your view, for insurers to offer tailored solutions to meet the needs of a particular policyholder?
Absolutely, it's really important that there is a wide range of clinicians and a huge range of activities. Understanding what each of them do day to day and what their exposures are means that should a claim occur, the right insurance is going to be in place and they are going to be appropriately covered. Like I said previously, there's not a one size fits all. The only people that's going to impact negatively is going to be your patients at the end of the day.
Yeah. And we see quite a lot, and of course, it's something that we pride ourselves on offering from Altea, the importance of having combined covers available that are all sort of healthcare focused. Can you give us some sort of examples about why it's so important for, let's say, medical malpractice and, for example, public liability to be dovetailed together in that way?
Yeah, so in terms of medical malpractice and public liability insurance, there can be incidents that potentially may fall under one or other of the policies. It's important that brokers or claimants notify both insurers of an incident, and in case there happens to be discrepancy between insurers as to who's picking it up. So, for example, if you believe a medical malpractice claim to come in and it's only advised to the medical malpractice insurers and not the PL insurers, medical malpractice insurers decline it, stating this is a PL issue. Further down the line, potentially, you realise that that's not been notified in the correct policy period, etc., or there's been a delay in notification, and that could result in the claim not being covered under the policy. But similarly, even if you have two policies with the same insurer, but you have a standalone PL, general liability department, and you've got a med-mal department that's running on their own cost centres, you still might get a claim come in notified to both, and they might be arguing between themselves, bickering as to where the claim is ultimately going to lie and actually whose P&L that's going to sit on.
Yeah, and thank you. I mean, it is unfortunately a grey area that we see quite regularly in this space. I mean, whether something is a public liability matter or whether it's a medical malpractice matter. I'm thinking, for example, of a number of claims that I handled involving allegations of nursing negligence, where a patient has, for example, had a fall, fallen out of bed because the cot sides weren't raised. And there's been a debate about whether that is a claim that could be classified as a slip or a trip and fall to the public liability cover, or whether it's medical malpractice and therefore falls to the med-mal cover. And I think that when you have that kind of siloed approach to liability cover, it can lead to some claims falling between the cracks because they don't naturally fit or very clearly fit in one camp or the other. And ultimately, the people who lose out in that scenario tend to be the policyholder for the reasons that you've explained, and the patient who may find that they don't have a route to compensation.
Yeah.
We've also talked about the cover being appropriate, being wide enough to meet the needs of the insured policyholder, and various extensions to cover that we now widely see in the market. It seemed to me that a good example of that would be an extension to have abuse cover to public liability. Can you just give us some feel about your experience around that sort of cover?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly in the care, health, social care sector, any local authority contracts are going to require abuse cover anyway. There's absolutely no getting away from that. It wouldn't necessarily, just having a small amount of cover in there that's quite specific might not necessarily be enough. There are all types of abuse, not just physical. There's sexual molestation, harassment, assault, etc. So it's not necessarily just physical abuse, which is important because, again, if it's not covered or not specified under an insurance policy, it's your policyholder and your patient that are going to be missing out.
Yes, and going back to what we were saying about long tail of claims as well, the cohort of abuse claims, can go back many years for organisations like children's care homes and so on. Also, I think there's certainly one of the factors that I've become aware of over the years is to make sure that as a healthcare entity, your insurance policy is sufficiently wide or is worded in a way that meets the requirements of the commissioning body, particularly if you're treating NHS patients. And what we've seen is that a lot of, for example, local authority commissioning contracts require independent sector healthcare contractors to hold any one claim cover, but that medical malpractice is typically only available in the aggregate. So again, there's this need for flexibility from insurers to make sure that the cover is fit for the purpose of the client. And it goes back to working collaboratively with the broker, with the client, and with the insurer to make sure that the client's world is properly understood and catered for.
Yeah, and furthermore, if somebody takes out an insurance policy that is limited or on an aggregate basis, and that's potentially going to impede them when they are tendering for contracts, it's better just to have them on an AOC basis if available in the first instance.
Sure. I mean, I'd just like to also talk about notification, because that is quite often one of the most important and controversial areas in which there can be a tension developing between the insured and their insurer, because it's just not been properly understood what needs to be notified and when it needs to be notified. And it seems to me that this is another classic example of where this collaborative approach, working together, understanding and explaining how this works and what the contract requires of the insured, is in all parties' interests, and having that clarity and flexibility. Is that something you agree with, that insurers can play more of a part in?
Yeah, absolutely. Just being clear with both brokers and clients from the outset what the claim conditions are to ensure timely notification of claims, incidents, occurrences, near misses, depending upon the insurer, the policy wording is really important for clients not to be scared to make insurers aware of things that have happened, for the worry that it might impact their insurance going forward, and then actually turn out they've not notified anything for a few years. Looks like they've got a clean sheet and everything come rolling in later.
Yeah, and I think there's various ways, certainly, that we've tried to approach this. One of the modules that we offer under our Altea Plus risk management service is a Know Your Policy service, where we try and provide as much clarity as we can about what we're expecting from our clients when it comes to notification, but also detail within the policy wording. So, for example, I always found it helpful when I was dealing with these things to have a very clear definition of the types of scenarios. It can never be an exhaustive list, but the types of scenarios that we think as an insurer amount to a circumstance, just to really help the insureds, because it seems to me that it's when notification is late, it's because the insureds usually haven't properly understood what it is that needs to be notified. And the number of times that I've had people say to me, yeah, but the claim is totally without merit. It's a complaint, but it had no merit to it.
The doctor said they didn't do anything wrong.
Exactly. And of course, that's just not the test. And it's not the trigger. And so understanding that, and understanding when somebody does make a reference to seeking legal advice, or when you get a letter from a regulator or a letter from a coroner or whatever it may be. And I think the more information that can be provided by the insurer about that, the more helpful it is. And it's a mutually beneficial way to address the issue.
The earlier that the insurers get involved, the earlier they can give advice that potentially, like you say, might mitigate any future claims, whether or not there is any wrongdoing on the insured's behalf anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, there's other ways that we can look to work with our insureds to improve the process and make sure that it's running as it should, by providing details of the sort of information that we need to be provided with on notification, and also helping insureds comply with other legal responsibilities, for example, their GDPR confidentiality obligations, and making sure that they are not, when they're notifying us of circumstances and claims and providing us with information and assistance that we're asking them to do, that they remember that they have these professional duties of confidentiality to their patients and service users, and that the data protection rights of those individuals may also still apply. So for the insurer, I think it's important to help the insured to understand and comply with that aspect, but also to help to make their lives a bit easier by confirming that they're happy to receive the information in an anonymized way, so that it doesn't fall foul of GDPR patient confidentiality issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think as well, some businesses that might have signed certain NHS contracts, for example, might even have that requirement that the patient records or certain information is not transferred out until such time it needs to be. So that assists with being able to comply.
Yeah. Can we just move on to look at claims and at risk management, because that's ultimately where the policy is going to provide the financial support and assistance. How does the claims process typically work, and what role do brokers play in helping their clients during this process?
It does genuinely depend on which brokers. Some brokers have an in-house claims department that might be able to have a lawyer on hand to be able to give some early advice to a client on notification. However, that generally isn't the case. The claims department will be there to take physical minimum details, get a claim set up on a system, and then pass that on to insurers. So really at the hands of each individual insurer to see how and what assistance they're going to provide. Some insurers will speak to the clients, help them with anything that they need. Some will pass straight on to their solicitors. And at that time, obviously, you're already opening a file and attributing a monetary amount that's going to start to eat away at any excess.
Yeah. Another way that I've seen the way that insurers or their claims teams certainly are able to help their insureds is really to assist them in getting to the answer. Is this treatment negligent as alleged? Is it something that is ultimately going to have to be settled? Is the compensation payment going to have to be made? Or is it something that can be defended and should be defended? And I think getting to the answer of that question as early as practicably can be achieved is really helpful. And an example that I have of that is where the claims team has early access to informal expert medical opinion, so that it's not a formal opinion that could be relied upon in a courtroom, but it's giving a steer, an informed steer at an early stage, which is then going to assist the insurer, but also the insured in reaching a consensus about the best approach for a particular claim, and doing it as early as possible to try and keep the legal costs to a minimum. We've talked a bit about claims. In your opinion, what is risk management and why is it so important in these sectors?
From a client's perspective, reducing risk reduces costs and reduces patient harm, but all three are going to be important to them. In terms of good risk management, that looks different to different businesses, and how they do it can depend upon the structure. But overall, the better risk management practices that are in place, the fewer patients are going to come to harm, the fewer claims are going to be made, and hopefully the cost of the insurance is going to come down.
Yeah, certainly my experience as well. And I think also it's about not reinventing the wheel and understanding that a lot of claims tend to come from the same recurrent medico-legal themes. So if you can have robust processes in place for things like obtaining consent and evidencing that you've obtained informed consent, you can ensuring confidentiality, making sure that you're being open and dealing with any complaints or a notifiable safety instance in compliance with the duty of candor, handling complaints in a way that is consistent, transparent, and effective. But you're going a long way to reducing the number of claims and mitigating their severity.
And also, I think sharing of knowledge as well. We can look across our different clients and perhaps see where claims might be starting to be notified. There might be a new claim trend. Something pops up in one place, being able to make other clients aware and put things in place to ensure that either the same things are not happening, or that they're aware that procedures are in place to be able to record how those particular treatments are being taken or being carried out, to be able to prevent any claims made against them.
Just to finish up, Vickie, we've talked quite a lot about this being a very sort of dynamic industry with very sort of complex and differing needs and so forth. How do you as a broker keep up to date with all that's going on, with all the development, the changes to the law, the new regulations, the best practice, the new treatment, so on. How on earth do you manage to keep pace with that?
I think maintaining an interest, turning up to events, there's quite a lot of lawyers in our sector that are putting on events, webinars, etc., reading up on thought leadership, learning from one client to another. So you might go out and see somebody who's had to have some sort of a risk management intervention. Actually, the lessons learned from that can then be shared onto other clients, but also just keeping on top of what are changes, new treatment. I'd like to keep on top of what new treatments might be on the horizon, but just generally having an interest in trying to keep on top of it. But there are plenty of webinars, etc., out there, because it's important that we understand the risk and the scope really as much as our clients do.
Yes, thank you. And is that something that you think insurers could play more of a role in helping to provide that learning and disseminate their expertise to help the brokers?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of both services that they provide, but also on changes to policy wordings, etc. Obviously, I've had a background in underwriting, so if somebody brings a new policy wording to me, I can take the time, have a look through it, advise clients on what changes between one and another. But not all brokers have been in that situation and have that experience, and it's important that they understand and don't just take it at face value of, this is the same insurance as last year, there's some small changes, but actually understanding the fundamental differences between one policy and another and how that might potentially impact the client in the event of any future changes, any claims, any contractual requirements, etc.
Thank you. We could talk about this stuff for hours, it seems, but I think we probably need to draw it to a close there. It just remains for me to say thank you very much, Vickie, for joining me today on Altea Talks and for sharing some of your war stories and for providing so much interesting and thought-provoking information about the fascinating world that we're both lucky enough to work in.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Altea Talks. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe or leave a like or a review on whatever platform you're listening on, as this helps spread the word. If you have any questions or comments or topics you'd like us to explore in future episodes, please do contact us, as we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on LinkedIn or visit our website at www.alteainsurance.com. Stay tuned for more episodes, and until next time, take care of yourselves. The information contained in this podcast is not intended to represent a complete analysis of the topics presented and is provided for information purposes only. The views expressed are personal to Vickie Rhodes and Will Marshall and do not necessarily represent the views of Altea Insurance Limited. The content of this podcast is not intended as legal advice, and no responsibility can be accepted for any reliance placed upon it. Independent legal advice should always be obtained before applying any information to particular circumstances.